Well, will President Biden allow student loans to continue deferment? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, students with student loan debt have had their payments deferred for a long time now. Will the government continue the deferment, or will student loan payments start up again September 1st? College admissions expert and Prudent Money contributor John Hupalo is here to weigh in. John, good to talk to you today.
Bob, good afternoon. Nice to be with you.
You know, John, I think it started back, March 2020, the deferment of student loan payments. Back then, would you have ever believed that here we are in August 2022 and this program still exists?
No, Bob. The short answer is no. It's hard to believe. They were supposed to be, they started, it was going to be 6 months or so, and the whole idea was, there was just so much strife in the country at the time, and let's give the students a zero interest rate and put a pause on their payments. That'd be a good way to take some of the stress. Okay, maybe in the beginning that made some sense, but how many times can they possibly kick the can down the road? This is really getting out of hand.
And I got to think that when you look at all the time that's gone by, and really probably not necessary to defer for this long. I mean, people have gotten out of the habit of making that payment. I think it's going to, at this point, being as long as it's been, I think it's going to be a problem.
Oh, I agree with you. Not only is it a problem for students restarting their repayment on their student loans. By the way, they signed a loan note that said they would do this repayment, right? And now the government's found all kinds of interesting ways to keep them from making those payments. But there's a statistic out there, Bob, that I almost fell off my chair when I read it. The cost to the U.S. taxpayer for this pause is about $5 billion a month. Of course, the way it was put in the paper, it said, well, the benefit for students is that they are, as a group, not paying $5 billion a month. So I scratched my head and I said, oh, wait a minute. That means that we, the taxpayers, who gave them money to start with, are not getting repaid. So this is $150 billion over the last 30 months or so that the students haven't made any payments. So we're taking the hit as a taxpayer. The students are being taught a very terrible lesson, which is you don't have to repay your debt. And now they're talking about kicking the can down the road for another period of time. It's really mind-boggling.
Well, you got to think about it for just a second. We have midterm elections in November, and what would it hurt to defer, so not to open up that can of worms and just defer the program until January 1st?
Well, yeah. Oh, what a surprise. Politics comes into this whole thing. How many times have we talked about the political sound bites that are just so beautiful that are just economically terrible? So, yeah, I agree. The midterm elections are here. We know the state of the world. We know the state of the country. We understand where President Biden's numbers are. We understand what all that means for the senators and all the members of the House of Representatives who are up for re-election. So, yeah. So August 31 was supposed to be the last day of the pause. Interestingly, Bob, last month, the federal government told all the student loan servicers in the country, if anybody asks about when they're going to have to start repaying their loan, don't comment on that. Just hold on communicating with the borrowers. Don't send them any notice saying, hey, by the way, on September 1, you're going to have to start making your payments. So this has been in the pipeline for a while. And again, you hit the nail on the head. It's political. There's really nothing more to it than that. It's just a political statement, and Chuck Schumer and some of the senators are playing a big game, and I think at a huge expense, not only to taxpayers, but to what they're teaching students about what it means to be a responsible, fiscally responsible member of our society. I think it's just terrible.
Yeah, I would be absolutely shocked if they turned that program off and made students started making those payments. Just absolutely shocking. I mean, you've heard of political landmines. This would be a political atomic bomb.
That's a good way to put it.
I mean, it would not be good politically.
No, they can't do it.
So you've had your finger on the pulse on this. What do you think? I mean, President Biden has to do something to quote unquote relieve student loan debt. Politically, he's got to do something. I mean, I look at you look at his approval ratings. I don't even think forgiving the entire thing's going to do anything for him. But what do you think they'll end up doing? If you had to guess.
Yeah, well, he's already done some of it. Of course,
right.
He can wipe out some debt with the stroke of a pen, and he's wiped out about $26 billion worth of that debt over the last year or so. And this is, these are for students who went to schools where the students, sometimes correctly, by the way, claimed that they were defrauded by the school, that it wasn't a good school, or the school closed, and so he's already given away $26 billion worth of loan forgiveness for those kinds of programs just with the stroke of his pen. But because Elizabeth Warren and some of the others made this such a big political issue back in the last campaigns, the last two presidential campaigns, there's pressure on him to do more. And from the left side of his party, the Elizabeth Warren progressive wing, they're asking him to forgive about $50,000 per borrower. And he's already said early on that he did not think that was a great idea. But what he does think is a good idea, because he's been putting this trial balloon out there now for about a year, is the idea of forgiving about $10,000 per borrower. And just by the way, if you want to put a number on that, that would be about $320 billion more of student loan debt that would be forgiven, and about 12 million borrowers currently. And, of course, these are not students anymore. These are people who are out of school. Most of them have jobs, and most of them are making these payments, by the way. But they would not have to make these payments going forward, and that's about a third of all the student loan borrowers in the country. So with the swipe of a pen again, he can wipe out something on the order of $320 billion more of debt.
To me, the answer is you go to the interest payment and you lock in a 2% interest payment and say that's all student loans are going to have 2%. That's it. Even that would be not a bad idea and would affect everybody.
Right, and I agree with you. One of the things that I've always thought was a pretty good idea that probably will never happen, and that the idea is to start the clock over for some of these borrowers who've been in default. So,
no question.
80% of the borrowers, Bob, are making payments on time. So that means they borrowed responsibly and they're paying responsibly, and they don't need any help. And by the way, if they do need help, the government has 8 or 9 different income contingent programs. So if you have a job where you lose it, or maybe you're not making as much as you were before, or whatever happened, you can call the student loan servicer. They'll put you on one of these income contingent programs. And like I said, there are 8 or 9 of them, so there's something there that fits just about everybody. But guess what? At the end of 20 or 25 years of those programs, if you still are unable to pay off all of your debt after that 20 or 25 years, it's forgiven. So you're making kind of minimal payments all along, and then at the end it's forgiven. So there are programs like this currently in place that are available to borrowers, and a good number of borrowers are making use of them right now.
So you'll love this, John. This is I can't recall who the government spokesperson was, but someone from the government said about the student loan deferment. He said, for the first time, many borrowers have had the opportunity to pay down debt, open a savings account, purchase a home, and save for retirement, none of which would have been possible without the payment pause. Does that strike you as a very odd quote to make about this deferment? I mean, if anything at all, it was there to help people get through a rough time, A. B, if they're going to be paying into anything at all, why don't you pay off your student loans at zero interest?
Right. Exactly right. And Bob, when you were going through all that, I thought, well, they forgot the other thing, buying stuff. right? They're out
Yeah,
there.
right.
People are, the consumer spending has been as good. Yeah, great. It's, people did save during the pandemic, but that's some of what's driving the current inflation problem, right? There is all this sort of like pent up demand. People have money in the bank, and now there are consumers chasing too few goods. So what happens? You don't have to be, a Nobel Prize winning economist to know that you're going to drive up the inflation rate when that begins. So I have very little sympathy for the government when they start talking about some of these programs because, again, they've caused a big part of this problem.
Oh, yeah.
And, again, because they want to kick the can down the road, they want these great sound bites, which they've gotten for the last 30 months. And they, in my view, have not done very many of us a big favor.
So what do you do if you have student loan debt, get the letter in the mail that says, okay, you have to start making the payment again, and you're looking at it and you're just very realistic. Maybe you can make the first couple of payments, but you know that that's something you can't do long term. Well, what do you do?
You do what we've been talking about for quite a long time, and if your listeners don't hear anything else in this whole program, to me this is the most important thing. Anytime there's a whiff of a problem with regard to paying a student loan, call the student loan servicer. They have tools available. I mentioned before there are 8 or 9 different repayment programs that are out there. Talk to the student loan servicer about what program might work best based on what your income is. And by the way, if you lose your job, there may be some programs where you can defer payments legitimately during that period of time. There are all kinds of opportunities to move away from that repayment. Find something that's a little bit more affordable. So calling the student loan servicer, I think, is number one anytime there's an issue with regard to your payment. And you might also, by the way, there are other loan forgiveness programs out there, public service loan forgiveness program. There's a teacher loan forgiveness program. Those students are generally pretty good. They have pretty good knowledge about those programs because they're talked about while they're undergraduates or they're graduates. There's a lot of paperwork involved with those programs, so you have to be really smart about making sure you're using the right paperwork. But again, the student loan servicers, they know what the process is, and they understand how they can help students get the right program based on what their income is.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. If you want more information on John, mycollegecorner.com is a great website to go to, and he's got a lot of free information there. You know, John, I got an email through the Ask Bob, and I wanted to read it and get your comments on it. The email reads, I'm a veterinarian and owe $200,000 in student loan debt. I think that I can get accepted into an income-based payment program. Is my income plus my husband's income payment considered or just my own? Are there any loan forgiveness programs that I might qualify for? So what do you tell somebody that's staring down the barrel of a $200,000 plus student loan debt of any types of relief options there are?
Yeah, Bob, I'm just shocked every time I hear these stories about students who have that kind of debt, and they're almost always graduate students. And I don't know what this borrower's loan program is, but I'll bet a nickel, if you want, that this is a payment that was made under a program called the PLUS Loan Program. The PLUS Loan is the federal program. There's a program for parents, and there's a program for graduate students. And so you ask yourself, how do you get $200,000 in debt through any of these programs? And the Grad Student Plus program, you can borrow up to the cost of attendance less any financial aid you might get. And, of course, many of those grad programs don't offer financial aid. So this borrower most likely borrowed a very significant portion of their veterinary school tuition, room and board, whatever payments they needed to make. So the question you asked is the right one. So, okay, they've got the debt, they've got to pay it down. What this student, or now veterinarian, asked, and I think is exactly the right place to go, is what we were talking about before. Call that student loan servicer and ask which income-based payment programs may be available. My understanding is that most of those programs are just based on your own income. I don't know if they're joint filers or not. So, I mean, this is, again, questions, very technical questions for the student loan servicer, and they'll be able to provide the right guidance for that particular borrower. As for loan program forgivenesses for PLUS loans, I'm not aware of any of those programs. Maybe if he or she is a vet working for a not-for-profit, there may be a way to get into the public service loan forgiveness program. But again, the student loan servicer is really the first stop to start to get to the bottom of all that.
You know, and I want to make a distinction here and make sure that you agree with this distinction. That, you know, we talk about if you're having problems making your credit card payments, that you need to call the credit card company and talk with them. Now, the downside to that is that they automatically look at you as a risk. Sometimes they'll even put you into collections automatically for calling in. I mean, I've heard stories like that have happened. It's important to understand from and this I've gotten from the things that you've talked about. On the student loan debt side, they are there to help you. They are there to get you on track. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, absolutely, Bob. The student loan servicer is really acting on behalf of the government. That's one of the real important points here for the programs that we're talking about, for the federal student loan programs, the direct loans that the undergraduates take, for the PLUS loan programs that I just mentioned. Those are federal programs, and they benefit from I'm going to say they benefit, and they're also have some disadvantages because they are run by the government. And the disadvantage to me is that they try to make programs that generally one size fits all. And we know that with students and recent graduates and those in the workforce, there's really not a one-size-fits-all solution for the whole things. But the reality is the borrowers under the federal programs are benefited because the government really wants to try to provide access to education, and they use the loan programs as a way to do that. And they instruct the student loan servicers, and they monitor those student loan servicers very carefully. We had a show one time a while ago where we talked about the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau and the complaints there. And there are very few complaints launched listed of the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau relative to the size of the portfolio. Credit cards and others were many times more complaints. So I think overall the student loan servicers really want to try to help students find the best program, find something that's comfortable for them, and it's not a black mark when you call them and say, I need some help. They're going to try to help the student, borrower, the young family.
Yeah, and they might, and it's such a good program from the standpoint of they really have nothing to lose but help, and because with a student loan debt, there is no way out.
There's no way out. It's in the fancy word is non-dischargeable in bankruptcy, and dischargeable means you can get rid of it. So non-dischargeable means you can't. So unless you have some kind of very severe economic hardship or some disability or something has happened, and a judge can say this qualifies for this very extreme form of forgiveness, meaning that it's going to be dischargeable. For the most part, these loans are not discharged. They're going to continue to follow you around, so you really should make every effort to pay them down as quickly as possible.
Now, you've mentioned the Public Service Loan Forgiveness, the PSLF. I saw something the other day that talked about new changes that are made to improve the program, and you have them until October 31st. Talk a little bit about what's going on with that.
Yeah, the public service loan forgiveness was an idea that was hatched really to try to encourage students to go, maybe they have high debt amounts, but go work in the public sector and provide, just good, solid workforce, well-educated workforce in the public sector. So they came up with the public service loan forgiveness program. The problem, Bob, is that you had to make 10 years of on-time payments before you started to qualify for this loan forgiveness. And we talked earlier in the show about the paperwork required. So students, when they were leaving school and they were employed by these public services, they actually had to be listed as a qualifying agency, if you will. It's a legitimate place to work, and then students had to go and gather up paperwork to prove that they were there, working at that job for that period of time. And as it turns out, Bob, after that first cohort, so the first group of students that were 10 years into their repayment, they showed up at the Department of Education and said, okay, it's time to forgive my loan. They put their paperwork in, and literally like 99.5% of them had some problem, and they were unable to get any loan forgiveness. So the red flag immediately went up that there was a problem. So they've been working on this for 4 or 5 years now, likely, to try to find a way to sort of backfill that and say, okay, some of these students really were well-meaning. They really did work in the public sector. We need to try to loosen up the regulations a little bit so more of these folks can qualify for a benefit that we promised them. And so that's what they're trying to do. They've had these new rules that are going to be in effect for a short period of time to try to give these borrowers an opportunity to requalify for the program. So it's one of those things where it was a promise made. The government, not surprising when they wrote their regulations, made it so complicated, and they tried to cross every T and dot every I, that the students were apparently not able to keep that kind of record that they needed to qualify. So they're going to go back and try and fix it. We'll see how that works out.
And you've been in the middle of this for a long time. It just seems like they make everything so difficult, and it just doesn't need to be that way. There's pretty black and white answers to a lot of these problems.
Yeah, I agree with you, and part of it is what we said before, is that they try the one size fits all, and then in business we call it use cases. So okay, what is this borrower likely to do? And so there's this general population of people, and they say, well, but what about this one, and what about that one, and what about the other one? And when that generates then all these different big ideas about trying to help this whole group, and they start writing these regulations, and they start writing them very specifically. So we're going to try to solve that problem with this hammer. And then before you know it, you have this complex web of regulatory issues that the borrowers have to deal with, and it often backfires. This PSLF is one of the, I think, great examples of something that was actually really well intended. And the Department of Education got involved with the regulations and kind of mucked it all up because it just got so complicated that this borrowers couldn't comply. And so they're going to go back and try to redo this.
Well, John, great information. Once again, mycollegecorner.com is the website for great information on college and college admissions. You can go check it out. John, always good talking with you. Talk with you next month.
Well, I look forward to it. By the way, this is our anniversary show, our first one, August 15, 2016, Blaine's first week of high school. So we've come a long way. It's been great talking to you.
You too, John. Take care. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. And I love that he knows that. 2016, 6 years. That's hard to believe. And it's already August this year. Time just keeps on flying by. One of the things I wanted to ask John, and I'll ask him next week or next month, is what the true inflation rate now is for college. Now that you add our own outside inflation rate in. Be interesting to know that. Hey, this is Bob Brooks. If you got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time till we do meet again next time. Keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.